This particular topic, I think, is one of the most important ones that we will discuss over the course of the next couple of days. And first of all, let me ask in the audience, how many new facility executives or managers do we have in the audience? We got a few, quite a few. Everybody else is pretty seasoned, I take it, right? So you're here to learn some new tips and some things that perhaps you didn't know about before. Well, this topic, I think, is important because it kind of lays out a plan for you for how you can be successful in your job as a facility executive, and it really applies to almost anybody who is in a facility management position within the organization. So guess what? We don't have a very good track record of being successful as facility professionals, particularly as facility executives. And failure in our business is not an option. It isn't something that we can do at all. We simply cannot fail in our business. And yet, we have a lot of statistics that say that people fail as new facility executives in a relatively short time. We spend a lot of time interviewing not only senior executives in companies, but facility professionals. We interview a lot of facility folks, and we interview a lot of their bosses, and they say, we don't understand it. We promoted so-and-so into this role, and we thought they would be excellent in the job. And they're not making it. They're not cutting it. And we know that there are some reasons why facility executives fail, and we need to talk about those, but then we need to also talk about how do we mitigate the risk? How do we make sure that that doesn't happen? How do we ensure that we are successful in this job? So guess what? Here are some reasons why facility managers, facility executives fail. They haven't done their homework, and this is particularly important. There are two kinds of new facility professionals, those in facility executives, those who get promoted from within and those who typically come from the outside. And interestingly enough, people who come from within think, oh, I don't have to do my homework. I've been part of this organization. People know who I am. People know what I stand for. People know what I'm doing. Wrong. It's very different when you are in that corner office than it has been when you've been part of a staff. And so it's absolutely important to do your homework, and we're going to talk about what that homework is before you ever set foot into that new corner office or wherever it is. For people coming in from the outside, it's even more critical because people do not know who you are. Your new staff has some ideas, and we'll talk about the rumor mill a little bit because people have all kinds of ideas about this new person who's coming in. And so doing your homework and being prepared is probably one of the most important things you can do as a new facility executive. Also, people have a tendency to send the wrong message early. We know you want to get in there and make your mark. We know you want to make sure that your goals and your vision and your strategies are going to be implemented, but we don't necessarily send the right message initially. And we have to craft that message, and we have to make sure from day one that that message is a good message. And we're going to talk about that as well. And sometimes new facility executives focus on a strategy that really hasn't been vetted. It's one thing to come in with a set of goals and objectives and ideas, but you have to make sure that they have been vetted before you ever share them with that new staff that you're going to be inheriting. And we'll talk about the best ways to do that before you come into that office. Also, you have to build trust. Remember I said the rumor mill, if you're coming from the inside, is rampant. People are going to say, oh, so-and-so was promoted because, they were good at doing X, Y, and Z, or they knew some senior executive. We don't really think they have the right skills for the job. If you're coming from the outside, people are probably saying, oh, we know why that person was hired. They're a hatchet person. They're going to get rid of everybody. They're only wanting to outsource all of the facility management functions, so that's why they're there. You have to make sure you know that you're dealing with perceptions and ideas about who you are and what you're bringing to the table before you ever set foot in that office. And then finally, new facility executives have a tendency to talk more than they should and listen less. Anybody in the room seen Hamilton? If you've seen it, you know. It's one of my all-time favorites. I'm now revisiting the Federalist Papers. I'm a Hamilton aficionado almost now. I'm addicted to Hamilton. But you may remember that one of the things Aaron Burr says to Alexander Hamilton when they first meet each other before their infamous duel is that Ham, as he called him, Ham, you need to do something. You need to talk less and smile more. And one of the things that Alexander Hamilton was noted for was talking too much. Got him into trouble, ultimately. However, new facility executives can learn a lot about that from Alexander Hamilton. We want to make sure that everything that we're coming into this new organization and we want to accomplish is out there and out front for everybody to understand, except we don't listen. And we need to make sure that we listen more than we talk in the first 100 days that we are in that corner office or wherever that office may be. So what do we mean about doing our due diligence and part of our 100-day plan? Well, think about this. If you were part of a due diligence team within your enterprise, within your company, within your institution, and you were asked to look at a new building and see whether or not it should be added to the portfolio, you would do due diligence. The same is true if you are moving into the role of a facility manager. You need to do due diligence. And you need to make sure that you can answer 3 critical questions. The first one is, what is my mandate? Why am I here? Am I here to decrease the business bottom line? Am I here to implement a culture change? Am I a change agent for this organization? Am I here to institute some energy management and achieve some savings for the organization? What is my management? Am I here to turn the organization around? Or is my mandate to continue the work of a previous facility executive who's done an outstanding job and may have recently retired or moved on to something else? What is my mandate? You need to make sure you can answer that when you move into that new position. And then what challenges am I facing? Do I have a staff of folks who are getting ready to retire? That presents a huge challenge. That means I'm going to have skills gaps that I have to fill, and I have to make sure that I have the right staff for the right opportunities going forward. Do I have an organization that perhaps does not have a good customer service reputation? And does that mean that I have to make sure that my customer satisfaction stats go up? Is that one of the things that's going to be important for me? Also, am I facing an organization where perhaps nobody's paid much attention to the facility management budget? And so the C-suite may not even have interest in facility management. And so does that mean part of my job is going to make sure that I can market who we are and what we do and present good business cases to try and increase the facility management budget? What are the challenges that I'm facing? And perhaps, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, maybe you have to look at the lay of the landscape. You have to look at sort of the internal political environment. We're going to talk about that too. And then what expectations have been set for me? What is the hiring official? What is my new boss? What is the C-suite expecting me to do? What are going to be my key performance indicators? How will I be measured? Will it be to decrease the budget? Will it be to improve customer satisfaction? Will it be to change the culture of my organization? Will it be to bring new technology into the facility management organization? What are the expectations? How will I be measured, and how will I be evaluated? Those are critical. How do you get that stuff? Well, first of all, you get it from reports. And people who are promoted from within typically say, I don't need to read those. I've been part of those. I've been developing those reports for as long as I've been part of this organization. Remember, sitting in this new office, you will have a different view of those reports than you did when you were part of the staff. And you're looking for different things. So what do the reports tell you? And also, as a facility manager now, you need to be looking at corporate reports. How are we doing as an enterprise? How are we doing as an institution? Are we achieving our business goals? Are we in trouble? If you're in an environment that is a product environment or a manufacturing environment, how are our sales? What's our return on investment? You need to look at different kinds of things. You also need to do interviews. If you're internal and you get promoted, it's a lot easier. You can ask people if you can talk to them and have a formal interview. Before I take over in this job, I'd like to interview you and ask you a few questions about what your expectations are for my facility department. Much easier if you're there from the inside and being promoted. If you're coming from the outside, you can ask your hiring official if it's okay if I can come in and interview people. I'd like to talk to some of my organizations that are going to be partners. I'd like to talk to folks in IT. I'd like to talk to the HR folks. I'd like to talk to the marketing department. I'd like to talk to people who are going to be participating in my new challenges with me. And then also, you want to make sure that you do some informal conversations. So perhaps, again, if you're coming from the inside, you know people. And so you can say, would you mind having a cup of coffee with me? There are a couple things I'd like to talk to you about before I take over in this job. You want to start getting people involved, and you want people to know that you really value and appreciate their opinions. Again, if you're coming from the outside, you also can ask, is it okay for me to ask people to step out and have a cup of coffee with me, or to have lunch with me, and to chat about some things? I would like people to get to know me before I show up on that very first day. It's doing your due diligence, doing your homework. Aha. Another big landmine for new facility managers is the failure to assess your own skills. You may have promoted because you were great in the technical area of facility management, but you may not have had a lot of experience or training or background in management and leadership skills. So that's a gap for you. And you need to make sure that your second lieutenant, if you're lucky enough to have one, or that somebody in your organization has those skills. On the other side, maybe you're coming into that role because you are great at strategic planning. Maybe you're great at the big picture kinds of things, and so you're there because the facility department needs to establish longer-term goals. They need to have a new strategic plan. They need to be able to link that to the business and the corporate, the enterprise strategic goals. And so if you're really good at that, but you don't know much about the business of facility management, the day-to-day kinds of things, you need to make sure that you have some folks who are very, very good in those technical areas. So you need to assess what are my strengths and what are my gaps, my weaknesses, and how am I going to fill them? I always tell new facility executives when we do some coaching for them that when you come into that role, you want to plan as if you're going to leave in 10 days. Why? Because everything you plan for has to be spot on, has to be able to be implemented, and you have to make your mark within those kind of first 10 days, even though this is a 100-day plan. And yet you want to work when you get there as if you're never going away, because you want your staff, your team, to feel like you are fully invested. You are fully committed to your new role as a facility executive. And then you need to deal with kind of what's my motivation, and you have to be honest with yourself. Maybe it's a stepping stone for you. Maybe this is a smaller facility department and your goal is to run a huge facility department somewhere. That's okay. You just need to know what your motivation is. Or maybe your motivation is, this is my last hurrah before I decide I want to retire, and there are some things that I'd like to accomplish and I'd like to leave a legacy. That's okay too. You can know that, and that will help you as you set out your strategic goals and your strategic plan. But you have to be honest with yourself and figure out what your motivation is. That's part of your due diligence. That's part of figuring out all of the important things before you ever set foot in that new office. You also need to kind of mitigate the risks up front and deal with a number of different components that are going to be working with you and working against you in this new role. The first one is your customer group. You've got lots of customers, and if you don't succeed with customers, your internal customers in particular, you're not going to be successful. So you need to look at what are my risks there. Do we have a bad customer satisfaction rating as a department, or are we heads and shoulders above every other organization in the enterprise overall? If so, then how am I going to deal with those issues, and how am I going to maintain that momentum? You also need to think about the C-suite because they are particular customers. They have demands, they have wants, they have needs, and they expect those to be fulfilled at the drop of a hat. So you need to figure out, how am I going to have a quick team that's going to be able to deal with the C-suite and those wants and requirements. You need to think about your collaborators, those people who are going to be helping you. And they are all of those people who are internal, the partners that we talked about, people in IT, people in HR, people in health, people in safety, all of the people that are in organizations that are your partners, your teammates in the service arena. And then you've got external partners. You probably are coming into an FM department that has strategic sourcing partners. And how are they going to be helping you? Or are they going to fall in that category that I call competitors, because no matter what you think, there will always be some strategic sourcing partners who are hoping you're not as successful as you are hoping you will be. Why? Because they'd like more of your business. And so that's just a reality. And so you need to know whether or not they're on your team or whether or not they're going to be working at cross purposes with you. You also need to think about the capabilities. We talked a little bit about this before. What are the capabilities of my organization overall? Is it a seasoned workforce and perhaps an aging workforce? You know, we in facilities management don't like to retire. We don't like to leave. We like to stay as long as we possibly can. And so are they folks that are opposed to new technology and new processes and new procedures? Or do you have a young staff that's very technically skilled, but they may not be seasoned or mature when it comes to the culture of the enterprise overall? So you need to make sure you figure that out, and whether or not you have financial situations, whether or not your bottom line is not working too well in that department, whether or not, again, the expectation, your mandate is to change that bottom line for the facilities department and try to shrink it, or maybe it's to increase it. Maybe that's your goal. Maybe you're in a run-to-failure corporate environment or enterprise environment, and it's your job to change their thinking about making an investment and about asset management. I talked about your competitors and your detractors. There will be some people internally. There may be some folks, and maybe some folks who, if you were promoted from within, competed for your position and are not too happy that you got it and they didn't. Remember, you need to make sure that you bring them into the fold, that in fact they are going to be part of the organization and not working at cross purposes against you, because they may feel a little bit of agitation and irritation that they didn't get the job and you did. So you need to assess that and see what your risks are with those people. And then finally, you need to see what the landscape is. What are the conditions in that environment that you're becoming involved in? Maybe the company or the enterprise isn't doing that well, and maybe they're ripe for a takeover. You need to know that because you've done your homework and you've read reports, and so you know what the landscape is internally. Maybe the company is interested in growing, and so maybe there's going to be acquisition or merger or organic growth. Maybe they're going to be in a big hiring mode. You need to know that because that's going to have a huge impact on what you do as a facility manager. And then maybe the internal landscape is such that you have things like regulatory issues that are going to be changing. Maybe you're in a public utility and you have to deal with regulations and changes. Maybe you're in a healthcare or a drug manufacturing environment and you need to know what's happening with some of the testing and some of those new regulations. So these are all of the factors. Remember, you haven't even gotten there yet. And so these are the things you need to be looking at before you decide or before you move into that facility manager office. And if you are already a facility executive, a facility manager, you need to be thinking about these as you reshape, perhaps, a new 100-day plan. So this is day one, and now you're finally there. And day one is all about your building a relationship with your new team. Remember, a lot of people have stepped into that role before you, so don't reinvent the wheel. I know you want to make a mark, most people do. However, there's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. And so you don't want to do anything that's so outrageous that people automatically are not happy that you're there. If you're coming from within, it's a slightly different approach that you need to take, but similar than if you're coming from the outside. And so my first advice is be early and stay late. You need to get up, you need to have a good rest, you need to make sure you show up in your new office well before anybody else has. You want to walk around and see who's at their desk and get a sense of, is this somebody who's trying to score brownie points and make me think that they come in early and they're very good? Or is this somebody who comes in early because they can't get their work done? Or is this somebody who's trying to catch me before everything starts and maybe have a word with me? But you want to be there early, and you want to make sure and stay late, and I'll tell you why in a few minutes. And so the very first day, the most important thing for you is to build that rapport with your team. It's all about you and your new staff. And I sure hope you have a better first day as a facility manager than I did. I haven't been a practicing facility manager for what seems like 100 years now, but my first day, I was a new facility manager at the Environmental Protection Agency in Washington, and I was a Reagan appointee. I was asked to come in and do this job, and my very first day I came early because I had come from a management consulting environment, showed up my very first day, got in my office, and somebody yelled, "Get down, get down." So I got down, and then there was a shootout in front of my office. And I later learned that two security guards had had an argument about a woman they both were dating, and sadly, one security guard killed the other security guard. And then somebody came running in and said, "They work for you. They work for you. What are you going to do about it?" This is my first 5 minutes on the job. "They work for you. What are you going to do about it?" We ultimately took their guns away and made them customer service reps and changed our whole security structure. But that was my first 5 minutes as a new facility executive. So I hope that doesn't happen to anybody else. Certainly not something I would want to have happen. But your team, it's all about your team on that very first day. You want to try and build a rapport with them. And so that's important. And so you need to have a message. It's important to craft a message. You want people to get a little bit of insight into who you are and your character, and so it's important to share some personal information. Even if you're coming from the inside, people think they know you, but they probably don't really know you, and there's something that you probably can share, a tidbit that people probably don't know. And if you're coming from the outside, it's very important that you share some information and some insight with people so they have a little bit of look into who you are and what you know and where you're coming from. However, if you come from the outside, cardinal rule not to do. Do not say, "When I was at so-and-so, this is how we did it. When I was at this facility organization, this is how we did it." Wrong, wrong, wrong. Sends the wrong message, because then people say, "Oh, we're just going to be a rubber stamp for that other department. We're going to be just like them. So why even bother? Why is this person here? Just going to do he or she what they did in the other department." You don't want to say that. The other thing you want to make sure you do, remember, it's building rapport with your team. It's all about you and your new folks. And so you want to have an all-hands meeting. So you want everybody that's working for you to come together in a room like this, and you stand up and talk. Why? Because you want everybody to hear your first day message exactly the same way. Remember that old game we used to play when we were kids? It was telephone or whatever it was, and you'd whisper in somebody's ear, and by the time it got around to the fifth person, it was very changed. That's what happens if you don't give everybody the same message at the same time. And so that's why you want to do an all-hands meeting, because everybody walks away. Now, clearly, they're going to have some comments, and they're going to talk about what it is that you have said, but they've all heard the same message. And so they can't play telephone and dilute it or change it as it passes from one person to another. So you want to do that. So your message that day should be a little personal. Let me give you a little bit of insight into who I am and what I do and kind of what I do, for fun, or what I do externally, or what I'm involved in, and sort of my philosophy. And then you want to be strategic a little bit. You want to talk about what your vision is, what your goals are, etc. And you want to make sure that you have a takeaway for people. A one-pager, doesn't have to be a tome, doesn't have to be 10 pages and bound, a one-pager with some bullets. These are some things that I want to share with you. I want you to take these and think about it, because this is where we're headed. Probably we are going to be very customer-oriented. That should be a takeaway in a bullet. We are going to be an organization where performance is critical, and we are going to deal with facts and we are going to deal with metrics. So we're going to be measurable. We are going to be an organization that is very customer-friendly. We want our customers to feel that we are problem solvers. That's a good takeaway. And so you want that as one of your bullets. We also want an organization where we feel like we have open communication. This is going to be an open book organization, so we're going to share information. We're not going to withhold it. We're not going to hoard information. It's going to be shared. That's a good bullet and a good takeaway. We are going to be a team, and yet we are going to hold individuals accountable as well for personal performance. So that's a good bullet. And then finally, we also want to have a good time. You know, we spend a lot of time in our facility environment. And so we want people to come to work every day enjoying it and making sure that it's a place they want to be. So that's important. You also have to realize that your impressions on the very first day that you leave behind with folks are going to be impressions that they take away and they live with for a very long time. And you got 100 days for these folks to kind of be part of your team, so it's important. You want to create what I call a home of the brave. So behavior, how you behave and how you reinforce the behavior of the folks in your team is important on that first day. There are a couple things that are critical here too. Remember, we talked about doing homework, making sure that you have read reports, that you know things about the organization and about the enterprise overall. So what you want to be able to do is to praise and make sure that you plant seeds when you're talking. So if you have an organization that has been very well known or very well thought about, you want to give an example. You want to talk about, you know, the behavior that we want to maintain in this organization is like the time I read about what you all did when you moved 100 people from Lab A to Lab B. You did it on time, within budget, and you had, 98% customer satisfaction. That's a good example of something that you read about and is a good takeaway for them that, oh, this person knows a little bit about us. Or you want to reinforce another kind of behavior. I've read that you've had, wonderful customer satisfaction ratings up until last month, and something must have happened there. We need to study that a little bit because one of our goals is going to be to improve or increase customer satisfaction. So you're planting seeds, you're reinforcing positive behavior, but you're also talking about things that may need to change. You want to talk about relationships. Here's how we're going to deal with one another. Again, open book, information sharing, communication, a team environment, all those good things. My door will be open and available to people. Internal relationships, and then how are we going to work with our external partners? The people in HR, the people in IT, the people in finance, bless you, the people in contracts, the people in all of those environments. And also, how are we going to work with our external service providers, knowing that we have to hold them accountable, and that's going to be important, but we want a partnership relationship. Attitude. Attitude is how an organization chooses to win with its strategic and its tactical capacity. That's attitude, how you choose to win. So you want to create an environment for a positive attitude. Our attitude is going to be one of openness, our attitude is going to be one of performance, our attitude is going to be one of customer orientation, our attitude is going to be one of personal integrity and responsibility, and we will hold our teammates accountable, but we will never point fingers at our teammates in front of a customer. You want to talk about attitude a little bit. You want to talk about values. What are we going to hold accountable and personal in this organization? What are our values? Again, our values, openness, positive dialogue, good feedback, camaraderie, performance, metrics, all of those things. What are the values? What do we hold sacred within the organization? And then again, what's that environment? What is our organization facing? Are we ripe for a takeover if we're in a corporate environment that isn't doing well? Are we going to be growing? Are we going to be dealing with a new set of regulations if we're in fact in a public entity? What's the environment look like, and how are we going to deal with it? And so that, again, for your new team creates a picture. It tells them that you have done your homework, it reinforces what they've done well, but it sets the stage for your expectations for the future. Still, day one, and you're staying late, and you want to check in with your boss. And this establishes the precedent for how you're going to communicate with your boss. Some organizations, it's important to stop in at the end of a day and chat with your boss for a few minutes if they're around. Maybe you text your boss. You have to establish up front how you're going to do that with your boss. Maybe you make a phone call and say, I'm exhausted, I had a really good first day, here are some of the issues we've been chatting about. But remember, don't let your boss drag you away to meet a lot of people on that first day. The first day is all about you and your new team. And you can see your boss at another time. But at the end of that first day, make sure you check in with your boss, and also make sure you walk around and see who's still sitting at their desk. Again, whether or not they're sitting at their desk because they can't get their work done, whether they're sitting at their desk because they want to make a good first impression, or sitting at their desk because they want to chat with you personally. On the first day as well, think about who's going to be your mentor. Every new facility executive needs a mentor. If you're coming from the inside, you may already have one. You've probably picked somebody who has a great reputation in your overall enterprise and is valued highly. And so you've already selected that. But when you are coming from the outside, and hopefully you will have had some of those interviews so you can find that individual, you want to pick somebody that you'll be able to go in and talk over problems with, somebody who can guide you in the politics, small p, within the enterprise, and somebody that you can kind of bounce some ideas with every once in a while. So make sure you have a mentor, that's important. So the end of day one, you go home and you're exhausted, and assuming you come back for day two, then you start working with your team. And when you're working with your team now, it's time to get strategic, and then you have to get tactical. So in order to get strategic, you're going to be creating what I call the burning imperative. I'm going to tell you what a burning imperative is in a moment. A burning imperative is what drives the team. It's the single shared purpose or single shared purposes that are going to help that team be successful and catapult you to success as a new facility executive. And so this is when you begin to do that on day two. Your team needs to know the difference between a burning imperative. A burning imperative is how you're going to be measured and how you're going to be evaluated in terms of your success. A burning imperative may be we have to reduce by the end of the first quarter our budget overall in this area. A burning imperative may be by the end of the third quarter we have to have a 90% customer satisfaction rating. A burning imperative may be by the end of the second month we have to make sure that we have some plan in place for energy management. Those are burning imperatives. You don't want too many of them, but you want enough of them so your team knows what their critical goals and objectives are, so you can create tactical action plans, and so you can build in performance indicators for individual team members. A shared purpose is your long-term down the road. What do you want to be known for? Maybe ultimately you want your facilities organization to achieve your Enterprise Excellence in Service Award. That's a long-term kind of shared purpose thing. Maybe you want to be known in the FM industry as being best in practice for having established X, Y, and Z. That's a shared purpose. It's not going to happen overnight, and it's something that you and your team are going to be working towards long term. Maybe you want to have an organization where ultimately they're going to be achieving some award. Maybe you want to achieve the BOM award for Best Organization of the Year. Maybe you want to, develop some new approach or some new practice. That's a long-term shared purpose, but it's not a burning imperative. It's not going to make or break you or your team, and so your team needs to know the difference between those things. So again, days 2 through 30, you're working on your burning imperative. It's the focus of your leadership, and it's the focus of the actions that you are beginning to develop. You have to develop your tactical capacity to make sure that those burning imperatives are achieved, and it is the heart of what you and your team are going to be doing. So how do you do that? Well, you have to deliver, and you have to create milestones. And milestones are the key to measuring how well you're doing. It's your plan versus your actual, and you build in milestones along the way for each of your tactical actions to get to that burning imperative achievement. You need to make sure that you talk about linkages. Who do I need to work with in order to make this burning imperative? Let's say it is reduce the bottom line in one category of our budget by X. Who do I have to work with internally and externally to make that happen? Maybe we have to bring in some external supplier, maybe we have to do something else. What are the decision rights? What are the parameters that my team has to make decisions in order to get us to that ultimate goal? And you have to have early wins. If you don't have some small wins in that plan, your team's going to get discouraged because you're working on 100 days here. And so if your team doesn't have early wins, you are going to get discouraged and your team is going to get discouraged. And early wins provide an opportunity to highlight your successes and showcase what you're doing as a team and as a new facility executive. Who's going to be held accountable and for what? How do people fit into this overall tactical plan, and how are we going to hold them accountable? What are the individual performance goals for each of my team? What is the information that's going to be required? What do we need from internally from our folks, from our team, and how do we get that information? And what kinds of information do we need externally? Those are critical actions in your action plan. You need to manage those milestones. By day 45, you ought to have a plan in place to manage those. You need to prepare for your meetings where you talk about plan versus actual. There's nothing worse than coming into a meeting and people aren't planned and prepared to talk about how well they're doing or where the information is lacking or where they need help to get to those end goals. You need to problem solve. Many new facility executives hope that problems go away. If I don't deal with it, it'll go away. Deal with them head on. I'm going to talk about it in just a minute. You need to prioritize which of these burning imperatives is most critical, and if the whole focus of the company or the enterprise changes, how can we then reshift our burning imperatives and create new ones? How do we report on our milestones? How do we talk about how well we're doing and where we have gaps and where we need to focus? And then make sure that every person who comes into a meeting to talk about those action plans is prepared and there's follow-up. Your early wins, you have to have something that's meaningful by day 60. Again, if you don't, everybody gets discouraged. And so maybe it's just a small win in customer satisfaction and you've improved that stat. You need to make sure that you have some small wins. And then you can showcase them. You put those on your intranet, you put those on your web page, you put them on social media, whatever you use in your enterprise to showcase those kinds of things, you do that. You want to invest in your good resources, those people who are helping you, make sure they have the tools and the resources to make things happen. And again, celebrate and communicate. We're in the business where we don't get flowers and champagne and balloons very often. And so we need to make sure that we pat ourselves on the back and that we encourage each other when we're doing a good job. That is really important to your success. Then by day 70, you've been a great facility executive. You've been wonderful. Everybody thinks you're terrific. Kaboom, it's time to shock the organization. Now's when you have to shake things up. So you need to look at your structure. Are the functions operating correctly, or do I need to move those parts around? Maybe I have a group that's performing this function and they need to be co-located with this group and they're not doing a very good job of communicating. Shake it up a little bit. Maybe my talent isn't right. Maybe you've got a lot of talented people, but you've got square pegs and round holes, and so it's a mismatch. I just wrote an article for the BOM magazine about a healthy versus a sick FM organization. And one of the things that happens is we have talent mismatches. We have people who aren't necessarily performing in the right roles and the right functions. And so you need to change that up. You need to look at roles and responsibilities and maybe shuffle your staff around just a little bit. You need to look at your mission. Are we on target? Do we have the right mission? Do we have the right burning imperatives? Are we working and moving forward towards those? And then finally, what are our customers saying? Are they saying we're doing a good job? Time to take a little bit of a customer attitude feedback. Maybe you do a mini survey, maybe you go around and sit and talk and meet with some of your customers. This is the time you start to get feedback. Then you have to fix the outliers. First of all, when things aren't going well, you need to fix it. We have a lot of new facility executives who kind of bury their heads in the sand. Again, it'll go away. Nope, you got to deal with it. If it's not working, fix it. If you have talent that isn't talented enough for what you need, counsel that talent. If you need to figure out that person needs to go away, figure out how to do it and make sure you have documented poor performance. I just read some stats recently on the last World Series, and apparently we put in more pitchers during the games than we ever have in the history of World Series. Usually they have relief pitchers, but more pitchers came in to pitch during the World Series than typical because they weren't doing their job as well as the coach wanted them to. So if that's the case, bring in new people, change up people, move them around. But if things are working well, don't mess with it. Again, you want to make your mark as a new facility executive, but if it's working, don't fix it. Just keep going with the plan. You have to believe and invest in your good performers for three goods. Is it good for me? Is it good for my organization? Is it good for the work that is being done? If all those things are positive, keep those people in the same place. And then guess what? You reach 100 days and you got to start all over again. You have to look at your leadership. How am I doing? How well am I performing? You have to get feedback from your folks, and you also need to make sure that you know whether or not your leadership is doing the right thing for your organization. How is the culture? Have I created the kind of open culture that I want? Are we all sharing information? Are we all positive? Do we have the value system that I wanted to have in place? How is the culture? And then do we have the right practices? Maybe we need to streamline. Maybe we've heard feedback from our customers that when they get a call in the call center, we don't submit whatever we need to submit to our technicians to get them out in the field or helping customers fast enough. Do we need to retool that? Do we need to streamline anything? It's time to start all over again. We also need to then think about how people perceive what we're doing. There was a wonderful fella in my field in organization re-engineering, redesign, by the name of Chris Argyris, a Greek fellow who wrote a lot of stuff on organizations and things to do. And he created this thing called the ladder of inference. I make it steps instead of a ladder. And basically it says that people judge how well we are doing by a number of different things. There's real reality in terms of these are the facts and these are the figures. There's also selected reality. People are like elephants. They remember certain things that they want to remember, particularly customers. They have a long memory. They have assumptions. You know, we know dealing with the facilities department is always a problem, or the facilities organization is always customer-oriented, and they always help us solve problems. So they build in assumptions. They draw their own conclusions. And then they also have beliefs about who the facilities folks are and what they stand for. And then they put all of that in a mixing bowl, and that's how they evaluate the actions that they see coming out of a facilities department. So you need to make sure you don't skip any of these steps, that you go through and evaluate how your customers are dealing with you and how you're performing, and that will tell you a little bit about where you need to make some tweaks. And then ultimately you need to manage your calendar. You'll never have as much time as you have on that very first day, and yet you need to learn how to control your calendar. There are some critical aspects of every facility executive's calendar. The first is the calendar does not hold that person captive. You need to make sure that your calendar is not what controls your life. I think of some of these things, some of the more critical ones. We talked about quick wins. Just say no, you can't do everything. And that's what a good facility manager learns to do. You prioritize and you have good people, and so when everybody wants you involved, you make sure that you push down to the rest of your organization things that you do not need to be involved in. I say you have 10-minute phone calls and no drive-bys. It's great to have an open door policy, but you don't want everybody hanging out at your front door all day long because you need some alone time. If you don't have good alone time, you'll never be strategic. You'll never be able to work on your plan. You'll never be able to figure out the problems and what you need to change. And then you also, I like emails once a day, and people always say that's impossible. It's possible, A, if you have good help who can screen some of your emails and take on some of the problems themselves. And you don't have to respond to everything immediately because we get so many FYI emails that they just clog up our email chain. So you don't have to do emails all day long. Set aside some time to do them. And then make sure that you know that the office is not your home and that your health and well-being is important. It's critical to succeed, yes, but you don't want it to be all-consuming. You want to enjoy yourself too. You've figured out what your motivation is. You've figured out why you want to do this job. And so make sure that you have room to grow yourself so you can do all of those wonderful things that you have to do in the first 100 days, but that you continue to do as a successful, ever practicing, and moving forward facility executive. So let me stop. We have a couple of minutes left. I'm happy to take a couple questions. I'm happy to hear from anybody who's been successful or has something that they want to share. Questions, comments from anybody? They could be both. The question is, what do you do about small wins? They could be little things. You know, maybe your organization has been successful in getting certifications. Maybe they're all now CFMs, or maybe they're enrolled in Pro FM, you know, near and dear to my heart. And so maybe you've got 3 people who have achieved certifications. You want to promote that. That's a small win because that adds to your credibility. And then there are wins associated with milestones. Maybe you're trying to improve your customer satisfaction, and so after you've been there a month, it's improved by a little percentage. You know, you want to highlight that, you want to tout that, because it looks like you're succeeding. There are 2 differences for facility managers. A facility executive is being discussed in an elevator, and one senior executive says to the other, how do you think the new facility executive's doing? And the person says, I think they're doing pretty well. Seems to have a good rapport, seems to be moving ahead, seems to be doing the right things. That facility executive is either headed down a slippery slope or is not being very well thought of. The other conversation goes the same way, but they say, yeah, within the first month, they've improved customer satisfaction. They've also got an energy plan that's going to reduce our energy costs. They've also done this. They've got 5 people who are now certified. That person is positive. You've got to do that. So yes, they're both. Anybody else? Yes? Yeah, good. Managing up is important. There is a marketing chain, and the marketing chain is you need to make sure that you get to see some of those key executives in other departments, the head of HR, the head of IT, the head of finance, the head of contracts. You build that rapport with them. Then they start marketing up, and they tell their boss, and then they tell their boss, and all of a sudden the C-suite hears wonderful things. So that's important. You want to promote yourself across the organization and up the organization. And so you have to get out there. You have to do dog and ponies. You have to spend time with people. You have to be in their offices. You have to be invited to their meetings. Those are the critical things. And you have to make time for the C-suite such that your agenda is on their agenda on a regular basis. And somebody said, how do you feel comfortable to do that? You have to practice. You have to push yourself and practice. And it works, because that marketing chain really works.